Before you hear what I'm about to tell you, I need you to understand something first. This isn't a story about a smart watch or a GPS tracker or any particular piece of technology. It's a story about how the people closest to us can become the ones we should have been watching all along. We spend our whole lives teaching children to be careful around strangers, around dark parking lots, around people who seem too friendly, too fast. Nobody ever tells you to watch the person sitting at your own dinner table on Christmas Eve. Before you judge anyone in this story, including me, ask yourself one honest question. If someone you raised handed you something with a smile on their face, would you have thought twice about it? My name is Earl. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician in Savannah, Georgia, and I can rewire a circuit panel in the dark, but I couldn't see what was happening in my own living room until it was almost too late. It started the way most dangerous things do, quietly, with something that looked like love. My son came back to Savannah in October. Daniel is 34. He'd been living out in Phoenix for 6 years, working in something he called logistics consulting, which I never fully understood but never asked too many questions about either. When he called to say he was driving back for a visit, my wife Carol was so relieved she cried at the kitchen table. We hadn't seen him in 2 years, not since the holidays before everything got complicated between us. He'd missed my knee surgery. He'd missed Carol's 61st birthday. He always had a reason. I always accepted it. That's what fathers do, or at least that's what I told myself. He pulled into the driveway on a Thursday afternoon with a trunk full of bags and that wide Daniel smile I remembered from when he was 17. Confident, a little too polished. I shook his hand and he pulled me into a hug I wasn't expecting. Carol made pot roast. We sat at the table for 3 hours, longer than we'd sat together in years. He asked about the neighbors, about my old work crew, about whether I'd finally fixed the leak under the back porch. It all felt genuine. That's the part that still gets to me. It felt so genuinely like my son coming home. On his second day, he asked if he could take a look at my phone. Said he wanted to update some apps for me, make things run smoother. I handed it over without a thought. I was in the kitchen making coffee. He was at the dining room table for maybe 15 minutes. When he gave it back, the screen looked exactly the same. He said he'd cleaned up some storage and added a few shortcuts. I thanked him. Carol thanked him. We thought he was being helpful. He stayed for 9 days. 9 days of dinners and old stories and driving past places we used to go when he was a kid. He helped me replace 2 outlets in the garage that had been giving me trouble for months. He took Carol to her hair appointment on a Wednesday so I could stay home and rest my knee. On his last morning, he hugged us both at the door, said he'd be back for Thanksgiving, and drove away down the street with that trunk full of bags. 3 weeks later, I noticed something odd. My friend Terrence, who I've known since we were both apprentice electricians in 1987, called me on a Tuesday morning. We talk every few weeks, long calls about nothing in particular, football, the cost of everything, our grandkids, retirement. Halfway through that call, Terrence said something that stopped me cold. He said, "Hey, did you ever end up selling that Chevy?" I told him no. I still had the truck, wasn't planning to sell it. He got quiet for a second. Then he said, "Huh, because your son called me last week, said you were thinking about liquidating some things, asked if I knew whether you'd talked to a financial advisor recently." I sat down at the kitchen table. "He called you directly?" "Called my cell," Terrence said, which I thought was strange because I didn't think he had my number. He shouldn't have had Terrence's number. I'd never given it to him. I got off the phone slowly, sat there with my coffee going cold, trying to build a logical explanation. Maybe he'd found the number somewhere in the house. Maybe he was just making conversation, and Terence had misunderstood. I ran through every version that made sense until none of them did anymore. That evening, I went into my phone settings for the first time in probably 2 years. I don't know exactly what made me look. Some instinct I couldn't name, the same one that tells you a wire is live before you test it. Under my apps, there was one I didn't recognize. The icon was small, plain, looked almost like a default system app. The name meant nothing to me. I pressed on it. It asked for a password I didn't have. I didn't say anything to Carol. Not yet. The next morning, I drove to the Verizon store on Abercorn Street. The young man at the counter couldn't have been more than 25, took one look at the app, and his expression changed in a way I recognized. The same look Terence gets when something in a circuit doesn't add up. He asked if he could take the phone to the back for a few minutes. I said yes. When he came out, he set the phone on the counter between us, like he was placing it into evidence. "Sir," he said carefully, "this application has permissions that include microphone access, contact access, and location tracking. It's not from the App Store. It was side-loaded." I asked him what that meant in plain English. He said someone had manually installed it, bypassing the normal download process. It was designed to run in the background without being visible during regular use. It had been active for 22 days. 22 days. Since the morning Daniel sat at my dining room table with my phone for 15 minutes while I made coffee. My mouth went dry in a way that had nothing to do with thirst. The young man asked if I wanted to remove it. I thought about it for longer than he expected. Then I said, "Not yet." Something in me made that decision before I'd fully reasoned through it. The same instinct that had sent me into the settings. If someone was listening to my life, I wanted to understand why before I shut the window. I drove to my old shop and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching pigeons walk across the asphalt. I called Terence back and told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Earl, what does Daniel need that badly?" That was the question that cracked it open. Because the truth was, I didn't know how Daniel was doing financially. Not really. He talked around it in the careful way people talk around things they don't want examined too closely. Logistics consulting. Phoenix. A new apartment he'd mentioned once and never again. I realized I'd been filling in the gaps with assumptions because it was easier than asking. That night, I put my phone on the kitchen counter and talked out loud the way I sometimes do when Carol's watching her shows and I'm just moving through the house. I talked about my pension, about the money in savings, a number I made slightly higher than the truth, about how Carol and I had been discussing whether to refinance the house. I said it all casually, the way you say things when you think nobody's listening. I hated doing it. Every word felt like wearing someone else's skin, but I needed to understand what this was for. The next morning, Daniel called. He opened with small talk, asked about my knee, asked if it had gotten cold yet in Savannah. Then he said, almost as an aside, "Hey, have you guys talked to anyone about the house? Like, financially? I was just thinking, with rates moving around, it might be worth looking into your options." My hand tightened on the phone. I kept my voice flat and easy. "Nothing definite yet," I said. "Still looking around." "I could help with that," he said. "Research some stuff for you. I know a guy out here who does estate planning. Real good with situations like yours." Situations like yours. I was 63 with a bad knee and a paid-off house in a neighborhood where I'd lived for 27 years. I asked him what he meant by that. He backed off, smooth and fast, the way you do when you've gone a step too far. Said he just meant he wanted to help, that as I got older it made sense to have things organized. Nothing wrong with planning ahead. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Carol was in the garden, I could see her through the window, pulling up the last of the fall tomatoes, her back to me. I thought about telling her right then. I thought about calling Daniel back and putting every card on the table. Instead, I called Terence and told him to meet me for lunch. We sat in a booth at a diner on Victory Drive that we'd been going to since the 90s. I laid it all out. The app, the call about the truck, Daniel's question about the house, the phrase, "situations like yours." Terence listened the way he always listens, without interrupting, without filling the silence. When I finished, he put down his coffee cup and said, "You need to look at your paperwork, Earl." I knew he was right. I just hadn't wanted to face what looking might mean. That afternoon, I went through the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. Carol organized it years ago, everything in labeled folders, insurance, taxes, warranties, the deed to the house, our wills from 2008 that we kept meaning to update. I went through every folder slowly. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Then I found something in the back of the drawer, behind a folder of old car titles. A folded piece of paper, printed, not handwritten. A list. Names, phone numbers, the name of our bank, the approximate address of our investment account at Edward Jones, the name of Carol's primary care doctor, my cardiologist from 2 years ago, my Social Security number, partially obscured but recognizable. At the bottom of the list, in the margin, 2 words in Daniel's handwriting, POA timeline, power of attorney, timeline. I sat on the edge of the spare bed with that piece of paper in my hands and understood what situations like yours meant. It meant they were planning a situation, one where I needed help managing my own life, one where someone else had the legal authority to manage it for me. I thought about every conversation I'd had in that house for the past 3 weeks. Every complaint about my knee, every mention of being tired, every time I'd said I couldn't remember something, which at 63 happens more than I'd like and means exactly nothing except that I am a 63-year-old man. I thought about how those moments could be assembled into a different story, one where I wasn't capable, one where someone younger, someone concerned, someone with power of attorney needed to step in and help. I folded the paper back up and put it exactly where I'd found it. I drove to the police department on Habersham Street the next morning. The detective I spoke with, a tired-looking man named Reeves, listened with the specific patience of someone who has heard many things he considers not quite his problem. When I finished, he leaned back and said the app alone was a civil matter, that without evidence of financial fraud already occurring, there wasn't much they could do. I wanted to put my fist through the wall. Instead, I said, "What would you need?" He said I'd need to document everything. Communications, dates, the phone records, anything in writing. He said if Daniel attempted to access my accounts or filed any legal paperwork, that would change things. Until then, he told me to be careful. I walked out into the November air and called Terence from the parking lot. "They said it's not enough yet," I told him. Terence said, "Then we make it enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Terence helped me build what he called the file. He's methodical in a way I've always admired. No wasted motion, no assumptions. We printed every text message between Daniel and me going back 4 months. We wrote down dates and times and the exact wording of phone calls from memory. Terence showed me how to record my own calls, which is legal in Georgia when you're a party to the conversation. He reminded me to keep copies in more than one place. "People your age get dismissed," he said, not unkindly. "Paper is how you stay real." Meanwhile, I kept up the performance. I wore the phone everywhere. I talked about my finances out loud, the way I apparently had been for weeks, without knowing anyone was listening. I mentioned that the Edward Jones account had grown nicely. I said I was thinking about adding Carol to the deed more formally, which was actually something we'd always meant to do. I complained about my knee making me slow and said I wasn't sure I could keep up with the house maintenance much longer. Each time I said something like that, something happened within a day or two. Daniel called to ask how my doctor visits were going. He texted Carol links to articles about assisted living facilities in coastal Georgia, said he was just curious what options were out there. He emailed me about a financial planning service run by someone he knew, said he'd be happy to set up a consultation if I wanted. No pressure. Once, Carol showed me a text he'd sent her directly while I was at a doctor's appointment. It said he was worried about my energy levels and whether I was keeping up with things okay. Carol looked confused when she showed it to me. "He didn't ask me," she said. "He told me, like he'd already decided something was wrong." That was the moment I told Carol everything. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She cried twice. Not loud, just the quiet kind of crying that means something is broken in a place that doesn't heal clean. She kept saying she didn't understand, that this was Daniel, that he was her son. I didn't argue with any of that. It was all true. He was her son. And he was doing what he was doing. Both of those things lived in the same body, and we couldn't separate them. What I needed her to understand was that she couldn't tell him we knew. Not yet. The hardest thing I asked her to do in 35 years of marriage was to sit across from her son on a phone call 2 days later and act like everything was normal. She did it. Her voice didn't waver once. I sat in the next room listening, watching the floor. Daniel announced he was coming back for an early visit before Thanksgiving. Said he wanted to help us look at some paperwork together, maybe get some things in order. He had a friend who was a notary, he said. Very convenient. I called Detective Reeves and told him. This time the conversation went differently. I read him the text message about the assisted living links. I told him about the POA timeline note in Daniel's handwriting. I told him about the 17 documented contacts in the past 3 weeks, each one following something I'd said on a phone we now knew was being monitored. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay, Mr. Earl, let's talk about next steps." The day Daniel arrived, I was ready. Not in a dramatic way. I'd ironed a clean shirt. Carol made coffee. The house looked like it always looked, lived in and unhurried. Daniel came through the door with 2 bags and that same wide smile, a little more uncertain this time around the edges. He knew something was different, even if he couldn't name it. We sat at the dining room table. I poured the coffee. Daniel had brought a folder of his own, set it on the table beside his cup, like he was arriving at a meeting. He started talking about estate planning, about how he'd been thinking a lot about our future, about how much easier things could be if we had a structure in place. He used the word "we" a lot, like he was already inside the decision. I let him talk. Then I slid the folded piece of paper across the table. The one with the list. The one with the 2 words in his handwriting at the bottom. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the paper. He looked at me. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Where you left it," I said. He tried to recover. Said it was just research, just exploring options. Said he was worried about us and wanted to be prepared. He said the word "prepared" 3 times. His voice had that tightness people get when a story doesn't quite fit anymore, but they're still trying to wear it. Carol was very still beside me. She didn't say a word. I put my phone on the table. "I also want to talk about this," I said. He looked at the phone. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. "The app you installed," I said. "The one that's been running for 22 days. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. Somewhere outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. Daniel said, "Dad, I was just trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," I said. There was a knock at the door. Terrence came in, and behind him, Detective Reeves. Reeves had someone with him from the Financial Crimes Unit. They introduced themselves. They asked Daniel to sit back down. What came out in the next hour I won't repeat in full, because some of it belongs to my family and not to anyone else. But I'll tell you the parts that matter. The app was traceable. The calls Daniel had made to financial institutions in my name were documented. There had been a conversation with a paralegal about initiating a capacity evaluation, the kind used to establish grounds for guardianship. Daniel was 34 years old and in significant debt, a number that made Carol close her eyes when she heard it. The logistics consulting had stopped 18 months ago. He hadn't come home because he missed us. He'd come home because he'd run out of other options. Reeves and his colleague spoke with Daniel for a long time. Terence and I sat on the back porch while Carol stayed inside. The air smelled like dead leaves and chimney smoke from somewhere down the street. Terence handed me a cup of coffee from a thermos he'd brought and didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly right. Eventually, Daniel came to the back door. He looked smaller than he had that morning. He looked for just a moment like a kid who'd done something he couldn't take back and knew it. He said he was sorry. He said it looking at the porch floor, which told me the sorry had more to do with getting caught than with what he'd done. But I've been wrong about people before, and I won't close the door entirely on the possibility that I'm wrong about this too. He left with Reeves, not in handcuffs, just left, with that folder still sitting on the dining room table. Carol cried again that night, the real kind this time, the kind that takes something out of you. I sat beside her on the couch and didn't rush her through it. At some point she asked if I thought she'd failed him somehow, if something she'd done or not done had made him into someone capable of this. I didn't have an answer that was true and kind at the same time, so I just sat there and let her ask the question. We called a lawyer that week, a real one, a woman named Patterson who came recommended by my doctor and who specialized in estate planning and elder law. We updated our wills. We removed a shared account Daniel had been added to years ago when he was in college. We changed passwords, every single one, which took most of a Saturday morning and made me feel like a stranger in my own house for a little while. Terence checked in every few days. One morning he stopped by the shop where I still do occasional work, slapped me on the shoulder and said, "You still standing?" I told him I was getting there. He nodded and said that was enough. Carol and I talk about Daniel sometimes. Not often, not easily. She still loves him the way mothers love their children, which doesn't have much to do with what those children deserve. I understand that even when it's hard to sit with. The investigation is ongoing, which means I can't say much more about where it leads. What I can say is that what he tried to do, replacing me with paperwork, reducing me to a capacity evaluation and a signature on a form, it didn't happen. I made sure of that. Not by yelling, not by confronting anyone in anger, but by paying attention when something felt wrong and not convincing myself that the feeling was nothing. Here's what I've learned at 63 that I didn't know at 40. Your instincts are not overreactions. When something in you goes quiet and watchful, when you pick up your phone and go into the settings for no reason you can name, that is not paranoia. That is 30 years of living in your own life, telling you something your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. Listen to it. Check the things you've been assuming. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. If anything, it's the only way to stay in a position to keep loving them. You can't help anyone from inside a situation someone else has engineered for you. I also want to say something to anyone who's heard a story like this and thought, the police won't care, nobody will listen. You might be right the first time. Detective Reeves wasn't ready to help me on the first visit. I had to build the case myself, with Terence and with patience, until the evidence was loud enough that they couldn't look away. Document everything. Write down dates and times. Keep copies in more than one place. Find your Terrence, the person who will sit across from you in a diner booth and help you figure out what you know. Everybody needs that person. And if someone in your family is trying to tell you that you're slipping, that you need help, that things are getting complicated, ask yourself one question. Are they trying to help you? Or are they building a story about you? The difference is in the details, and the details, if you look for them, are always there. I stopped looking at my phone the same way after all of this. I check the settings sometimes, not out of fear, just out of habit, the way I check a circuit before I touch it. You learn that from 31 years of electrical work. Assume nothing is safe until you've tested it yourself. The house is quiet now. Different kind of quiet than before. Honest, the way a room feels after you've opened all the windows and let the stale air out. Carols in the garden most afternoons when the weather holds. I drink my coffee on the back porch and listen to the neighborhood and think about how close I came to losing the right to do exactly this. Not loudly, not dramatically, just one form at a time, one signature I hadn't read carefully, one moment of trusting someone because I wanted the story to be the one where everything was fine. If this story left you uneasy, good. That unease is information. Use it. Talk to a lawyer about your documents. Know what you've signed and what it means. Check in with the people in your life who knew you before your money was worth anything to anyone. Those are the people who will tell you when something's off. Those are the people who will sit in a parking lot with you while you figure out what to do next. Your name and your right to speak for yourself are not small things. They are everything. Don't let anyone rewrite that story for you. Not even someone who showed up at your door, smiling with a trunk full of bags and 34 years of your love in their pocket. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, share it. These things survive in silence, and they fall apart in the light. This is Voices of Uncle Walter. Take care of yourselves out there.